All right, class, welcome to our quick homework correction session. I know that we said that we were not going to do a review, but we're going to instead focus on doing homework corrections that you guys have been working on this entire week. So let's just jump right into it and go over some of this information, okay? All right, so let's see here. During the Cold War, the problems between the Soviet Union and the United States was that they had different ideas about organizing governments and the economy or economics. So what we want to look at here is the difference between ideologies between the two countries. So government and economics, remember that. All right, so next up, from 1945 to 1960, the United States and the Soviet Union waged the Cold War by helping governments of friendly countries and opposing unfriendly governments. That's what we're looking for. Helping governments of friendly countries and opposing friendly governments. So we are going to go ahead and go with that. All right, next that we're going to do is look at our next question here. What did the Soviet Union and the United States both do in fear that they would be attacked by the other country? Well, as we have studied, the Soviet Union and the United States both prepared to wage war against each other. And they did this by building up their nuclear arsenals and also improving and increasing their military hardware. So you see that as a buildup on both sides that happens all the way up until the late 80s. All right, so what was the overall effect of the Cold War? Well, the big one is if we look at it, both the United States and the Soviet Union, they spent vast sums of money on their military forces, and yet both managed to avoid direct confrontation and war with each other. So with the Cold War itself, when we're talking about the two major superpowers, remember, no direct war between them. Instead, they engage in fighting through proxy wars typically, usually with military advisors or other people in place. Okay, so what did both the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan do? Well, if we remember the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, they aided friendly governments with money and military supplies. So both of them were designed to improve countries and make sure that they were economically balanced, and also that they had the military power to hopefully prevent communist uprisings. All right, next one. All right, what was the purpose of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Well, NATO was designed again to protect all those Western European countries, and it was to prevent and also oppose further Soviet expansion in Europe. So what was it designed to do? It was designed to prevent or oppose Soviet expansion in Europe. All right. Next up, after the Soviet Union closed off access to West Berlin, how did the United States directly confront the Soviet Union? Well, if we remember, through reading and through presentations, the United States engaged in the Berlin Airlift in order to supply Berlin because the roads and the train systems were cut off. So the United States flew in over 800 airplanes and had them constantly moving in and out and bringing supplies in. All right. How did the United States government respond to the Hungarian Revolution? Now remember, the United States had a policy where they were looking at trying to prevent further Soviet aggression and also to support governments that would be friendly to the United States and free Europe. However, during this time frame, when the Hungarian Revolution came through, the United States didn't do anything, and they instead allowed Hungary to fall in the hands of the Soviet Union, or ultimately just the communist parties of the area who were backed by the Soviet Union. So the Hungarian rebels were basically left to fend for themselves, and they lost thousands of them during the revolution. Okay, what two major steps did the United States take in helping to keep Japan from becoming a communist country? Well, the United States, remember, we ran a military governorship under Douglas MacArthur, and under that, we worked with them to establish a democratic government with a constitution, and we moved their economy towards a capitalistic system to ensure that they were going to be economically sufficient in order to not fall in the hands of communist ideology. All right, so instead of recognizing the leader of the People's Republic of China as the ruler of China, instead, who did the United States recognize and who did he represent? Well, you have the United States decide to recognize Chiang Kai-shek as the rightful ruler of the Chinese government. I guess to add a little bit onto that question, he was in Taiwan, so technically he represented the Taiwanese instead of the the Chinese mainland. All right. What was the purpose of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organizations, or SATO? Well, SATO again was designed, just like NATO was, to directly oppose both this time, though, the Chinese and Soviets' aggressive actions in Asia. It was designed to take those countries and make sure that they could stand up against, hopefully, Soviet aggressions and to improve their economies. All right. Which two wars did the United States get involved in to help stop the spread of communism in Asia? Well, the United States, of course, we fought in the Korean War, which we learned about, and also the Vietnam War. And both those wars were fought directly to prevent communism from spreading with mixed results. And we'll find out more about especially those mixed results in Vietnam when we get into a few units from now. All right, so what was the Eisenhower Doctrine? Well, the Eisenhower Doctrine was mainly focused around the Middle East, and it was to give aid to all Middle Eastern or any Middle Eastern country that was going to be threatened with communism, and they would give them military and economic aid. So the United States was looking to directly counter and blunt Soviet activities in the Middle East. That was their goal. All right. So the United States often supported harsh and cruel rulers in the third world countries in order to keep these countries friendly with the United States. Which Middle Eastern country and which Caribbean country did the United States use a strategy with? Well, remember we talked about the Shah of Iran. He was the one that we backed, so we meddled in Iran itself. And also in Cuba, we attempted to overthrow Castro on a number of occasions. So key ones in these is Iran and Cuba. All right, so why did the United States oppose Jacobo Guzman's government in Guatemala? Now remember, he was a leader in Guatemala that rose up, and he was to represent the poor and downtrodden down in his country in order to ensure that they had equal economic opportunities. Instead, though, he was blunted and stopped by the United States because there was a large American corporation, and that's the United Fruit Company. And the United States and the United Fruit Company decided to use pressure the American government, and the American government brought down the CIA, trained a group of guerrillas, and then sent the guerrillas in to topple the government. So that's what happened. So why did they oppose it? United Fruit Company. That's the big thing, is that he wanted to seize the land from the United Fruit Company. All right, next up. The Bay of Pig invasion was an attempt to infiltrate Cuba and overthrow which dictator? We just talked about him. So let's go again. And that was Fidel Castro's government. What they were trying to do is topple Fidel Castro, who was a communist revolutionary in the region, and they tried to do it with Cuban dissidents and invade via the Bay of Pigs. And when they got there, unfortunately, the United States pulled their support back at the last minute, and they were left to be slaughtered. Okay. Next one, which countries were members of the Warsaw Pact? I'm not going to ask you to label individual countries here. That would take a little bit of time for you to do. Instead, I want you to understand that the Warsaw Pact consisted of Eastern European countries that had communist or socialist governments. Not necessarily are all the governments over in the Eastern European bloc communist in nature. Some of them are socialist, but they're hard left socialists in the communist variety. All right, next up. What were the three goals of the United Nations? So when the United Nations was established, it had three main missions, same missions that it has still today. First and foremost, promote peace in the world. Second, improve living standards throughout the world. And third, to increase freedom to the people of the world. So its three goals is promote peace in the world, improve living standards, and increase freedom. All right. The knowledge that the United States could completely destroy the Soviet Union with what? That would be nuclear weapons. And that would be the deterrent that would keep the Soviet Union from becoming too aggressive. The United States does not necessarily try to counter Soviet size with American size. Instead, we decide to counter with nuclear deterrence and also advanced weaponry. That was our mainstay during the Cold War. All right, next up, what is a third world country? Well, remember we talked about this, but the definition that we're looking for is that they are non-industrialized, they're typically agricultural in nature, and they usually have a low standard of living. Some of those standards of living, like in Africa and those third world African nations, some of the people during these time frames were living on less than $1 a day. So pretty rough times in those parts of the world. Okay, so what was the domino theory? Well, domino theory, as we understand it, is the theory that one nation and a regional would, if they fell to communism, that their neighboring countries would also start to adopt communist governments. Now, I know it sounds a little bit like some people would think that's a little far-fetched, but you have to understand, again, remember when we talked about communism in general, usually they are aggressive in nature. They're trying to foment revolution wherever they are at. And so, for example, like Cuba, we did not necessarily have a huge problem in the Caribbean or even Latin America until Cuba became a communist country, and then they spread their influence throughout South America. So, just things to understand and realize. All right, next. Which government agency was created in order to gather information on other countries and Soviet activities? This, again, remember, is the development of our wonderful CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. And this one was designed to, of course, first and foremost spy on the Soviet Union and its satellite states. And then secondly, it was used multiple times by the United States government to foment and drive revolution in countries that typically had communist dictators or people who were allied with the Soviets and the communists. All right. Who replaced Joseph Stalin as the leader of the Soviet Union? That would be Nikita Khrushchev, and he became the leader. One interesting note about Khrushchev is that he actually he did not finish his schooling. In fact, he never graduated what we would consider high school. And people, even though he was the leader of the Soviet Union, would often mock him for his lack of schooling. Just kind of a weird little side note. All right, who was the general in charge of the UN forces in the Korean War? Why, that would be one of my favorite generals of all time, Douglas MacArthur. He was the supreme UN commander in the Korean War. Launched very innovative and unique tactics in order to drive the North Koreans from South Korea, and virtually had won the Korean War until the Chinese had gotten involved. All right, what was the name of the first man-made satellite launched into space? Why, that would be Sputnik, launched by the Soviet Union, and this was the very first man-made object in space, one thing that really jump-started and moved the space race forward. All right, there you go, guys. That's the end of the show there, and the end of our review of your homework. Now, thing to note is that the way the test is designed is that it will randomly put questions in order. So that does not mean what we just covered is going to be in perfect order. So if you try to take this video and play it while you're going through your test, it's going to take a very long time for you to accomplish that. So don't try to do that. Just use this as a review tool. All right, guys. Hopefully you do well on your test tomorrow. Remember, it is due on Sunday due to a lot of different factors of us getting interrupted here and having to move you to the school online. Look forward to seeing you guys again on Monday. That's when I'll do my next video with my beautiful face again. This time, though, I got to use my really awesome microphone compared to my lapel microphone. So hopefully this sounds pretty decent for you guys. All right, have a good rest of the day.